The Oregon Legislature is back in session.
I ask you to take your seats for the convening of the 2024 regular session of the 82nd Legislative Assembly of Oregon.
Over the next 5 weeks,
Senate Bill 1527,
we'll likely see hundreds of bills introduced.
Senate Bill 1528, Senate Bill 1529, Senate Bill 1530 relating to state financial administration.
Only a handful will make it across the finish line. But there are two we can be sure lawmakers will bring up.
Drug use will be recriminalized at some level.
We're definitely on that track.
It's critical that we do expand urban growth boundaries.
Tonight we're focusing our entire show on the legislature, on the laws they're working on, and how you, the people, can get involved in the democratic process, and why we have a strange system of short and long sessions. And hey, who's that giant gold man on top of the Capitol building? Here's the story in Salem. I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We're bringing you our entire show from Salem tonight because back there it's the opening day for the 2024 legislative session. They have a lot of work to cover in just 35 days. Not very long to get all that done. They're going to be focused on two big things. One, retooling Measure 110. That's the Oregon law that decriminalized drugs. And then secondly, they're trying to figure out how to build a lot more housing in the state of Oregon, which, as you're about to hear, is a lot harder than it sounds. I talked with legislative leaders on both sides of the House. We're going to start with the Democrat, the Speaker of the House, Dan Rayfield.
Representative Gomberg.
Dan Rayfield is the Speaker of the House, a Democrat who's a lawyer from the Corvallis area. When he's not serving in the legislature, he's a partner in a law firm representing consumers against insurance companies. This is his last term. He's going to run for Attorney General. But in the meantime, as the powerful Speaker of the House, he controls what bills will come up for votes in Oregon's House sessions. If he wants something to die, it will. So his thoughts on things like Measure 110, Oregon's law that decriminalized drugs, those thoughts carry significant weight.
Do you think Measure 110's been effective?
That was one of the things in our conversations at the very beginning where there was a lot of agreement that 110 is not working. There's also broad agreement that the system before 110 wasn't working either. And so we're in this space of trying to find what is that next system that's going to help people.
And you feel it's not working?
I do not believe 110 is working.
Yeah, okay. When we say not working, we mean not working as intended, where it would be treated as a public health issue, a lot of people would get help, addiction would go down, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't believe 110 is working as it was intended.
From what I've been reading, it seems that the Democratic majority is in somewhat of a tricky position in that the advocates who pushed for Measure 110 are not happy at all that any of those discussions are going on. How do you tread that fine line, I guess?
Yeah, I think what you're hearing right now is some of the criminal justice reform advocates, who worked to pass ballot Measure 110 are not pleased with some of the direction of the conversations. And then, like you astutely mentioned, is that there are some in the law enforcement community that would like to go even further. What our charge was to the committee was find the right policy. Your goal should be on people experiencing substance abuse and making sure that we give them the right supports and what is the right system to get them onto the path to recovery. And that has been our sole focus in the committee, and that's what we're going to continue to try and do. But at the same time, both sides need to have an avenue to be able to have their voices heard, because both of them have arguments for why they believe their approach is the right way to go.
And what about this outside threat of a ballot measure? Does that influence anything?
Again, it's very similar. You can have the threats of ballot measures, you can have strong opinions. In the legislature, what should control is proven solutions, making sure that we have a system that helps human beings that are suffering from substance abuse and families that need treatment for their loved ones. That is the challenge of the committee, and that's what we've said. You need to stay focused on that. As at the same time, listening to everybody, because if you're bringing a ballot measure, you can have wonderful ideas that should be incorporated into the process. If you're a criminal justice reform advocate, right, we should be listening there and incorporating those good ideas, and likewise from law enforcement. So that has been the challenge of the committee, is to sort through all of those different conversations, but then stay really grounded on proven solutions to make a difference.
One thing that we hear from, as you mentioned, the police need the tools. We've heard a lot from the police side that they want a statewide law that drug use in public, just like drinking alcohol in public, needs to be outlawed. Is it a good bet that that's going to happen?
Yeah, so that's one of the areas in this broad comprehensive package where there was a lot of agreement that public use is one thing that we can check off the list. The question is whether you go after public use or is possession enough to kind of encompass public use at the same time. But there's unanimity for the most part, I would say, that public use is something that will move back to making sure that that can no longer occur.
It also sounds broadly like drug use will be recriminalized at some level. Is that fair to say?
We're definitely on that track to have that conversation. Where that lands, there's a lot of different nuances in that, but we're definitely moving in that direction. It's still an active conversation in the legislature, though.
Okay, so the other big thing that the governor at least is highlighting is housing. She wants to build a lot more houses. Part of that is an interesting idea about the urban growth boundary, which we're starting to get viewers to say, yay, but other viewers saying, whoa, 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 hold on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. Part of the question that we're grappling with in the legislature is there is a lot of buildable space within the urban growth boundaries, but cities and counties don't have the infrastructure money to be able to connect up into those spaces. So a big part of the housing package that we're looking at is let's build in the space that we already have and make sure that cities and counties have that infrastructure money to connect into those areas, which again lowers that per unit cost. So that's going to be a big focus in the housing package. Now that's something that Democrats, Republicans, whether you're a land use advocate or someone who believes that they want to expand the UGB, that's something that everyone agrees upon.
We're over on the Senate side now. They're not in session. They met earlier this morning. But with housing being such a central focus for this legislative session, we thought we'd dig into that a little bit more. And we're going to do it with Senate Leader Tim Knopp. Outside of this building, he's a lawyer who represents builders of all sorts, so he knows the subject very well. This is also his last session. He led the historic walkout last year, and so he cannot run for re-election. We had a chance to talk about housing and also Measure 110, and in the background of the interview, you're going to hear some pounding. That's just the building that's going on here at the Capitol.
Well, it's critical that we do expand urban growth boundaries because we've been doing essentially the same thing for decades in Oregon, and what it's led to is us being behind by about 100,000 units of housing. So we need to make that up, and then you need to continue to be consistently building more to meet the demand. And if we're not going to do that, we are going to have more homelessness, and we are going to have more instability in the community. So it's really important that we deal with that issue this session. That's one of the most important things in that bill.
And I think as part of that, the governor wants to set aside, if I'm not mistaken, $500 million. But I've heard others argue that maybe some of that money should be going into a rainy day fund.
Well, there is money that goes into both the rainy day fund and the education stability fund on a biennial basis.
Okay.
So those are automatic unless the legislature diverts that money. But we still have funds available that need to go for infrastructure, and honestly, the problem is way greater than $500 million. It's billions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's needed, and cities would tell you that's water, that's sewer, that's roads that are going to be critical to being able to follow through with the opportunity for more land that's developable for housing as a whole. And so
Can you explain that a little more?
Support that, sure.
You work with a home builder, so you
Do.
understand it.
Yeah.
A lot of the public won't, but I think it's very expensive for developers to lay all that infrastructure in.
Well, there's no doubt that it's very expensive. And so the cities will cause that infrastructure to happen, or they'll, through SDCs, Systems Development Charges, and those can be pretty substantial. So in Bend, you know, your building permit's going to be, with Systems Development Charges, is going to be over $50,000 just for that. Yeah, and in some metro area cities, it's comparable or even higher. And it's hard to make things affordable when your upfront costs include, you know, and then you put the land in there, and you know, lots are going, like on the low end in Bend, probably 150, 175. All the way up to, you know, $1 million for a lot. So, I mean, it just varies and depends on the location. So it's hard to make something affordable when you start out with let's say $250,000 worth of cost right up front before you even, put a foundation or, stick in the ground. And so we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to make these homes as affordable as possible for Oregonians.
How important is Measure 110 to have some changes made to that?
Well, it's critically important to Oregonians that we move from essentially a decriminalization of hard drugs, including fentanyl, to recriminalize those as a misdemeanor, which is what it used to be. But the whole goal with it is to make sure that people with addiction are getting treatment and that they're getting toward recovery. And right now, there's really no incentive for them to do that because the measure created a ticket essentially for drug possession and gave you a phone number to call to get treatment. Well,
which nobody's doing.
Almost no one's doing that. And so there's really no incentive for people with addiction to get treatment. And we know that people are coming from out of the area, out of the state, to Oregon and are essentially taking advantage of our very lax laws as it relates to hard drugs. And it is going to be a problem, and I would say a problem that's getting worse in the future. So we need to resolve it this session.
As for his future, Tim Knope says he's not sure. He'll be out of the legislature, but he told me he still feels the pull of public service. So it seems like a good bet that we'll see him again somewhere.
We'll be keeping an eye open for anything else big that comes up during the session, but those are two of the big ones we're really going to be focused on. And did you ever wonder why they only get a month or so this time to figure out the budget and some of these laws? Last year they had a whole bunch longer. Well, it dates all the way back to the mid-1800s when Oregon first became a state.
So how did we get here? Oregon's first temporary legislature met in 1845 with a single body and no set schedule. The current legislative system was adopted in 1859 when Oregon was recognized as a state.
The first meeting was in the fall of 1860 for a brief 20 to 30 day session.
After that, Oregon lawmakers decided to meet only every 2 years and only for a month or two. Oregon has a citizen legislature. They're not professional politicians. The idea is that lawmakers also have a day job outside the session.
People back then, it was mostly farmers, would set their hoe aside and they would come to Salem.
It took some of the farmer lawmakers a long time to get there.
To come from Pendleton or Medford or Brookings up to Salem when there were no cars.
And there wasn't much to do. The population was still pretty small back then.
They kept meeting in the falls of every odd-numbered year until 1885, when they moved the sessions to January. Why? Because of the farmers. The fall is harvest time.
But by 2010, when, we had cars and planes, and Oregon was one of only 5 states holding a legislative session every 2 years, well, lawmakers started to wonder, does this really make sense? So in 2010, voters passed a constitutional amendment requiring lawmakers to meet every year.
It was put on the ballot for the Oregon voters, and the Oregon voters very overwhelmingly supported it.
Now, they're required to meet for 160 days in odd-numbered years, that's the regular session, and 35 days in even-numbered years, that's the short session we have this year. 5-day extensions are allowed by a 2/3 vote in both houses. During odd-numbered years, the session starts on the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Jr. Day and the first full week of February in even-numbered years. Special sessions can also be called if there's an emergency for lawmakers to deal with. Most recently, 3 special sessions were called in 2020 to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is our time. I never knew it'd be this bad, but this is our time.
There's no limit on the length or the number of special sessions that can be called. In the 164 years that Oregon lawmakers have been meeting, they've passed some real landmark innovations. Vote by mail, the beach bill, the bottle bill, and they've had some bitter battles.
There have been walkouts and fights and feuds since the beginning. And there were times when the legislators hid to avoid getting a quorum, were the bitterest, most vicious, most expensive fights for many, many years.
And that's how we got here.
This is the third floor on the House side where a number of the lawmakers' offices are. They get paid $33,000 a year plus $151 a day when they're in session. So let's say that you're really passionate about something and you want to come down here and let your voice be heard. Well, I'll tell you how to get to the Capitol building and how to get around to the offices. That's coming up next when the story returns. Welcome back to The Story. We're doing our entire show from Salem because it's the opening day for the 2024 legislative session. They're going to make a lot of decisions back there that affect everybody's lives, so you got to think about coming down and getting involved. I'll show you how. But first, have you ever wondered why Salem is the state capital for Oregon?
According to Amy Platt from the Oregon Historical Society, the state's first official seat of government was in Oregon City in 1844. The provisional government met there because it held the provisional land office and was an important economic center and one of the most populous towns in Oregon country. Platt tells us the government met there until 1849, when a land battle between American settlers and the British Hudson Bay Company's John McLaughlin had intensified. Platt says lawmakers moved their session across the river to Lynn City in 1850, in part to marginalize McLaughlin's influence. They also passed an act in 1851 to move all the executive offices to Salem, which was home to an influential group of Democrats called the Salem Clique. Loyalty to that group, or resistance to it, colored much of Oregon politics at the time. In 1854, Whigs and non-clique Democrats voted together to move the capital to Corvallis, even though construction was underway on government buildings in Salem. In 1855, the government moved back to Salem again. There were later votes to move the capital to Eugene or Portland or Corvallis, but in the end, it stayed in Salem. Driving south on I-5 to the Capitol takes about an hour from Portland. The address is 900 Court Street, Northeast, in Salem. One of the first challenges you'll face is parking. There's only one big public parking lot. It's called the Yellow Lot, and it's here at the corner of Center and Winter Streets. It'll cost you $6 for the entire day. You have to pay using a debit or credit card. Then you'll walk 3 or 4 blocks to the Capitol building. You'll notice there is some street parking around the building, but those slots are often full. There's also a major construction project underway to shore up the entire massive building, which means you will have to walk all the way around to the backside, which is on State Street. All right, so now that we have parking, it's time to go inside. There's only one way in. It's the backside of the building. It's right there, and there's metal detectors, so be careful about what you bring in. Once you get through security, you might want to stop here. This is a great desk to stop at. There's usually lots of people here. They have all kinds of information, including all the Senate offices, for example. You can find out who's in what office, and they can also tell you what's going on. They usually have kind of a sheet that has a lineup of all the hearings that are going on. Very valuable. These hallways are where a lot of stuff happens, and you're going to want to be here because during the session they'll be full of people, and they hold the hearing rooms where the laws really get hammered out. So like hearing room C, you can go in there and watch what's happening. You can actually even sign up to give testimony yourself if you want. In these rooms, this is where the sausage is made. We're in the same hallway, and down at either end you have the Senate or the House. So if you want to visit your rep or your senator, you can just come on in. Let's go up to floor number 3. We're here to meet Ashley Kinsey. She's the communications director for Senate Republicans in the legislature. Ashley, how are you?
Hi.
Sam, good to see you. You ready to go? You going to
I'm
show us
ready.
around? So people really can just come say hi to their lawmaker?
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about this place is you can just walk right in. If you want to talk to Senator Anderson, chances are he's going to be there or one of his staff. And you can schedule a meeting. You can go and, watch your senator on the floor, in committee, be a part of the process, and you can watch it all.
I'll bet to a lot of people, though, that's intimidating, thinking, oh, this elected person and this whole floor. By the way, this whole floor is Republicans, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
How'd you
Yep.
swing that?
Gosh, well, downstairs is all Democrats.
And they didn't want to be with you?
Well, but this floor is all Republicans, and above us is a combination.
Oh, so there is a
But there
combo.
are more Democrats, so there's a few more upstairs.
So is it all freshmen? You make the freshmen Republicans and Democrats sit together? Finally, unless construction activity blocks it, both the Senate and House have balconies where the public can sit and watch as members discuss and eventually vote on bills that are trying to become laws in Oregon. So you can see there's a lot of ways to get involved, and you should. It's an important part of democracy. But even if you don't live anywhere near Salem, you can take part virtually from your own living room. You can watch hearings and even testify. We have a step-by-step process that shows you that. It's on our KGW YouTube page. Just go to the KGW YouTube channel and search how to get involved with the Oregon legislative process from your own home. I know it's not the shortest title in the world, but hopefully you'll be able to find it. When we come back, there's a gold statue on top of the Capitol building. Who is that man? How'd he get there? Turns out he traveled a long ways. We'll explain when the story continues. When you come to visit the Capitol, it's hard to miss the Gold Man statue on top of the building back there. But who is he? And why is he there? He's called the Oregon Pioneer. He's meant to represent Oregon's pioneer spirit. The statue was commissioned for the new state capitol building when it was rebuilt in 1938 following a fire. This is actually the third Capitol building we've had. The Oregon Pioneer was designed and built in New Jersey by artist Ulrich Ellerhausen. The statue was sculpted out of bronze and then loaded on a steamship sent through the Panama Canal and onto a train up to Salem. Back in 1938, we didn't have helicopters or modern cranes. It took 3 days for workers to use ropes, pulleys, and a wooden crane to get him to the top of the Capitol building, 140 feet up in the air. Then he was wrapped in a cocoon while workers applied gold leaf all over him. He's had to be re-gilded in that gold leaf every 20 years or so, and it's a process that's getting expensive. It's usually funded by private donors. Back in the 80s, the re-gilding was funded by school kids who raised $37,000, mostly in dimes. In 1993, an earthquake damaged the Capitol building and the Gold Man came loose from his pedestal, but he was not damaged. Hey, thanks for joining us for our show from Salem tonight. We hope you learned something. We hope you follow along and get involved in the legislature this year. In the meantime, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for joining us. Remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. It just goes on and on. But for now, good night from Salem.